Okay, yeah, I guess HK guns are cool and all, but can they run Crysis? What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be taking a look at some of the guns from the Crysis series. Now, a quick disclaimer. The only game that I have in this series that I bought digitally is Crysis Warhead. So that means we're going to have to be borrowing some footage from other sources, and credit will be given where credit is due. The reason why I'm not just making a video on Warhead and coming back to the rest of the games later is because there's a ton of overlap with this series in the weapons sandbox, and I don't want to make 3 separate videos to cover the same guns with maybe 1 or 2 addition each time. The first weapon that we're given in Crysis as well as Crysis Warhead, and is a staple in the next 2 games, is the Scar. No, not that one. This is the Scar in the Crysis series, based on the real-world HK-XM8. So in the real world, the US Army is obsessed with replacing the M16/M4. If you follow military weapons development at all, you may know of a couple failed contestants, and you may know that the Army is actually trying to replace the M4 right now. The FN Mark 16 and 17, as well as the HK-XM8, were both failed potential replacements, though the Mark 17 actually does still see some use with Special Forces, hence the acronym SCAR, Special Operations Forces Combat Assault Rifle. But the XM8 more or less dropped off the face of the planet. Their current primary user is the Royal Malaysian Navy. You see, when it comes to replacing the M4, there's a scientific term that's used to gauge a weapon's efficiency compared to the old workhorse, and that term is better enough. I'm not sure that's grammatically correct, but it's why the average infantryman isn't running around with XM8, SCARs, ACRs, HK-416s, and so on and so forth, and is why I'm willing to bet that the current Next Generation Squad Weapons program is going to be shelved before the Army actually adopts a new rifle. You see, new weapons cost money, and the M16 M4 works good enough that spending any sort of money on an objectively better platform on any large scale isn't something that the Pentagon has traditionally been interested in. That's why the phrase military grade or mil-spec is all marketing. The military buys everything from the lowest bidder. Yes, there are weapons out there that may function better in adverse conditions. Garand Thumb recently made 2 videos on this. Or perhaps calibers with more stopping power, like the Army's current attempts with a new 6.8mm cartridge. But all that costs money, and the US military is already sitting on a stockpile of 5.56 and M4s that would otherwise go to waste. We're certainly not going to see them in the US civilian market. The SCAR over the course of the series does actually see a couple of variations, similar to the real-life XM8 platform, which had the main assault rifle variant, as well as a shorter carbine, a sniper, and a light machine gun. But they all vary wildly in appearance in the game, while their real-life counterparts are all pretty much just resemble the basic XM8. These are, in the same order as before, the Scarab, Takedown, or also referred to as the Scar-E in the books, and the Claw. Yes, the FN SCAR does have similar variations in real life too. Next up is the FY71, which is basically this game's version of the AK-74. It's arguably the most real of the weapons in this series, with the original Crysis version having what appears to just be synthetic AK furniture and a side rail for mounting optics. Later games do change it up a bit with an AR-15 buffer tube adapter and a Magpul CTR stock. It's the primary service rifle of the North Korean military in the first game and Warhead, and the main assault rifle the player will be using for most of the early game because ammo for the SCAR isn't available until US Marines invade the island. It comes back in Crysis 2 and 3, but it's multiplayer only in 2, and only 1 appears in the campaign for 3. It's for the most part inferior to the SCAR in just about every category besides ammo availability, but in the first 2 it does have one more attachment than the SCAR, which is incendiary ammo. Moving forward to Crysis 2 and 3, the Grendel was one of my favorite weapons back in the day. You may notice some resemblance to the Bushmaster ACR, which I covered in my Modern Warfare 2 video. This is because the Grendel appears to be based on the Magpul Masood, I hope I pronounced that right, which would have been a battle rifle equivalent to the Magpul Masada, which was the original name for what we now know as the ACR. The Masood would have been chambered in .308 with 300 Win Mag and .338 Lapua being potential alternate calibers. The Masood never made it past the prototype stage, and considering to date Magpul hasn't yet made a complete weapon system that they didn't license out to a larger company, it's not really hard to see why. I found in my research that a new rifle based on the Masood is in the works from Kinetic Research called the Fox 42. But I didn't know anything about that company before I went into this video, and I haven't found anything on that rifle later than 2020, so I don't know if it's still something that could be commercially available at some point. Exclusive to the Crysis 3 is the Typhoon, which is a pretty different weapon system that's described as a caseless rifle/shotgun hybrid that has 10 barrels, with each barrel holding 72 rounds for a whopping 720 round capacity, fired at an absolutely blistering rate of fire. Believe it or not, there actually was some research into something similar in the real world. Anyone who played Call of Duty in the early 2010s may remember the Bulldog shotgun, which had a somewhat odd reload animation in which you actually changed out the barrel. Now, that was actually a real gun by an Australian company called Metal Storm, called the MAUL, or the Multi-Shot Accessory Underbarrel Launcher. It was electronically fired, and the shells were loaded on top of one another inside the barrel. It seems that was the inspiration behind the Typhoon, as evidenced by the fact that a smaller version is available in-game as an underbarrel attachment for the other weapons. Visually, the regular shoulder-fire Typhoon reminds me of a cross between the HK-G11 and the FN-P90, the former of which was also an experiment into caseless ammunition. Back to the original game and warhead, we have the Ay69 and the MPX8 submachine guns. We're talking about them together because the Ay69, which is really the most gamer name for a gun possible, seems to just be a smaller version of the larger MPX8. In this regard, I see these two as similar to the real-life Uzi family, with the Ay69 being the micro Uzi to the MPX8's full-sized submachine gun. I don't know if there's any connection between the two of them in-game, and really that's as far as the connection to the Uzi family goes, but both weapons do seem to be inspired by the HK MP7, even down to the MPX8 being chambered in 46x30, which, in my personal opinion, is inferior to the FN57, if for no other reason the fact that FN actually made a civilian version of the P90 to shoot the 57. I actually laughed when CMMG introduced their 4.6 AR-15, because the only people who would realistically have a stockpile of 4.6x30 to shoot through it are the same ones who think HK might release their civilian MP7 any day now. Spoiler alert, they're not. HK thinks you're poor and they hate you. And no, I'm not just bitter because I really want an XM8. Yes, I know HK brought back the SL8, and I know Tommyville can convert an SL8 to an XM8, but it's really not worth it or realistic for me to drop $2,000 on a single stacked rifle and another $2 to $3,000 for someone to turn it into something halfway useful. I don't care if it's my dream gun or not. Lastly, we're going to be talking about the Marshall shotgun, which has appeared in all 4 games. Like the FY71, it's basically just a real weapon with a handful of sci-fi embellishments, this time based on the real-world Benelli M4 shotgun, used most prominently by the United States Marines. While it's only ever used in its pump-action mode in-game, the real Benelli M4 can be used in either pump-action or semi-auto, but surprisingly, the first game does have a mechanic where you can change the spread of the weapon. While it's presented more like an option on a selector lever, it's not really dissimilar from changing the choke on the barrel of your shotgun in real life to achieve the same effect. And this is something we don't see a whole lot in video games. For that matter, if you've been watching my gameplay footage, you may notice, when I reload on a partial magazine, Crysis actually does retain 1 round in the chamber of my weapon, for a total of the magazine plus 1. Something we don't see a whole lot in video games either. Thank you everyone for watching as I absolutely destroy another new computer trying to run this game. Please like and subscribe, and if my predictions about the NGSW or the semi-auto MP7 age like milk rather than a fine wine, please feel free to leave a comment telling me how big of an idiot that I am. I look forward to reading those as I drool over pictures of the new Springfield Hellion because I'm still too poor to afford a Croatian import that only vaguely looks like a bullpup XM8.